Rita Smith here at the St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Mooresville, and Rita has a story to tell us about her family. We're so glad that you're here today, Rita.
It's good to be here. All of this started in 2002 when my daughter was going to do a senior project. It was on the family coat of arms. I didn't have any idea what her family coat of arms was. So I put a phone call out to my cousin Dewey, who lives in Denton. And he mailed me this little packet of information, and I was just oohing and ahhing at all the stuff I found out about my family and about the quilt. The quilt was the main thing. I grew up all my life and never heard a word about a quilt in St. Mark's Lutheran Church. But once we got started on the project and things started falling into where they should, and Cindy done very well on her project. We have pictures here of Grandma Conley when she was a younger woman, not real young, but that's her and all of her girls, and all of those girls probably had a little hand in on the quilt. This is Mary here in the middle with her daughters and her son, and her daughters probably took part on the quilt. And then here's one of Mary at I think it was her 94th birthday party. She was sitting there with all the flowers by her and the big cake. Her birthday party was like a town event. Whenever she had a birthday, everybody came out. A lot of the folks that I've talked to, ladies that used to thread her needles for her, I met one lady, I can't remember what her name is, but I've got her phone number. She was telling me stories about she would come by Aunt Polly's. Some people called her Aunt Polly. But she would come by Aunt Polly's and thread her needles up for her so she could do her quilting. And this one, she's an older woman.
She was having problems with her eyesight.
Her glasses were like that thick. I have her glasses at home. I should have brought them so you could see them. But they were like that thick. Really, really huge. So I'm sure anything she sewed, her fingertips were probably really sensitive to stuff because of her vision, but she probably felt it with her fingers to meet her approval. But isn't that stitching on that quilt? That's just remarkable. I wouldn't know how to begin to make some of those stitches because some of them look like chicken feet.
Yes.
And then others look like little X's.
Yes. Well, tell us about her obituary, because I think that tells us about her family, her large family.
Yeah, she had quite a large family. Her obituary reads, Grandma Conley passes at age of 94. Mrs. Mary McRee Conley, age 94, widely known and beloved here as Grandma Conley, died last Thursday night, March the 15th, at the home of her daughter, Mrs. Kate Denny, with whom she had made her home for many years. Mrs. Conley was born in Tennessee on October 15, 1850, daughter of David McRee and Lavinia Thiel McRee. She was married in 1871 to Robert Wainwright Conley, who preceded her in death on June 24, 1903. To this union, 12 children were born, 9 of them living. There were 48 grandchildren, 79 great-grandchildren, and 6 great-great-grandchildren living. Mrs. Conley moved to Alexander County in North Carolina as a young girl who conformed in the faith of the Salem Lutheran Church in the county in 1885, when St. Mark Lutheran Church was organized in Mooresville in 1908. Mrs. Conley became a charter member, being one of 24 members. She had lived a long and useful life, was beloved throughout the county, and her death removes and remains an honorable and reverend landmark for the Mooresville scene. Surviving are 9 children: Mrs. N.T. Robinette, Mr. W.A. Conley, Mrs. N.T. Alexander, Mrs. E.C. Shook, Mrs. G.R. Atwell, Mrs. Oral Walker, Mrs. M.O. Johnston, Mrs. Kate Denny, and Mrs. C.G. Van Pelt. Funeral services were conducted at St. Mark's Lutheran Church Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock by the pastor, Reverend L.E. Blackwelder. Burial was in the Willow Valley Cemetery. And her grave is at the very bottom of the hill. If you turn in on the dirt road to the left there and go probably 10 feet, stop, and there's both of them. They're flat markers.
And you were saying about the husband?
Oh yes, he was, when he first passed away, he was buried at Center Presbyterian. Is that Center Presbyterian or Cottle Creek?
Cottle Creek.
Cottle Creek. He was buried at Cottle Creek, but Mary wanted him to be in town here with her where she was planning on being buried, so she had his body exhumed and moved to Willow Valley.
That was most unusual.
Very unusual. I was shocked whenever I read that. I was like, what? A little old lady saying, move my husband.
She wanted him there.
So
yes.
She moved him up here. And
A very determined woman, I believe.
very, very determined.
Yes.
Had a lot of children. And
Yes. Well, tell us about Quilt.
One.
many of the names on the quilt purchased these little scraps of cloth, and Mary embroidered their names on there for them. And there's such as Sloop, Bargers, let's see, Witherspoons, Millers, Mrs. H.C. Miller, Lucy Owens, Mrs. A.M. Freeze, and Grandma Conley's name is on here, but it's over here in the corner. And her daughter, Mrs. C.E. Shook, that helped her work on the quilts on there also. A lot of the names, some of them are familiar to me. Seems like I can remember some of the sloop names from when my grandmother worked around Mooresville. She was a nursing assistant and worked at the hospital for a lot of years. This quilt is, I think it's one of a kind. I surely had never seen anything like this. And I like quilts. I collect quilts. And go to quilt shows and stuff, but I've never seen anything like this at a quilt show. Only here at St. Mark's Lutheran Church.
Maybe we could have Mary Morrow come in and y'all could talk a little bit about some of the names that are on there. Mary's got a good grasp of some of the folks who are in the area.
We have a lot of names that are so familiar to Mooresville. Then we have Goodman name, Shimpock, and then it lists some pastors here from the time of beginning on down through June 1927, I believe it lists there. But we have the Ludwig name, the Colsons. We had the Colson sisters in this church. Then we go up to the very top. I don't know if that we can see it, but J.B. Barger, who had Barger Construction. And we have Mrs. Barger, J.B. Barger, and Willie B. Willie Barger is now Mrs. Gates, Miss Charles Gates. And so that was at the very top. We had the Hugh Sloops, and Mr. Bubba Sloop, as we called him, developed this area out here where St. Mark's Lutheran Church is, quite a large development, housing development. Other names that Mooresville people would recognize, we'll come over here in the Kleinger, McNeely, of course this is another sloop, Glass, Ritchie, Gatton.
That name sounds familiar to me. Alva Horton.
Well, the Hortons, don't know if that's the same family or not, but the Hortons had building supply company here for years. Don't think they were members of this church, but they're certainly members of the community. And we have the Brawley name, which is so familiar. Anyway, there's just so much history in this quilt over the people that lived here, and especially in this area.
I'd like to read this passage from the Iredell County Heritage Book, volume number 2. It says, Robert Wainwright Conley and Mary Pauline McCree Conley Robert Wainwright Conley was the son of Russell Conley and Cynthia Roden. He was born December the 3rd, 1845 in Alexander County. And he died June the 24th, 1903 in Mooresville, Ardell County. And September 15th, 1864, he enlisted as a Confederate soldier in the Army as Company D, 33rd Regiment, where he served until he was captured near Petersburg, Virginia in April 1965, the 2nd of April. Having been confined to Point Lookout, Maryland, April 4th, 1865. He was released on June the 26th, 1865, after taking the oath of allegiance. He returned to Alexander County and married a widow named A.B. Barker on December the 27th, 1868. It says she died sometime in 1871 or 1872. Then he married Mary Pauline McCree on August 8, 1872. Mary was the daughter of David McCree and Lavina Deal. There's several different ways to spell Deal, but it's spelled D-I-E-H-L, and then it's spelled D-E-A-L. And she was from Alexander County. Mary was born on October 15, 1850 in Cherokee County, North Carolina, and died March 15, 1945 in Mooresville, North Carolina. This is around 1890. The family moved to the Mooresville area. Both Bob and Mary are buried at Willow Valley Cemetery here in Mooresville. Bob and Mary had 12 children, raising only 10. 9 girls and 1 boy. They were preceded in death by 2 sons, James O. and David Cleveland Conley. Their children were Caroline, born November 15, 1872, and died March the 26th, 1965. She married Noah Taylor Robinette of Kannapolis. And then William Arthur Conley was born on the 9th of January, 1874. And he died on the 28th of June, 1948. And he married Nancy Tizza Davis. And I think that was my great-grandpa Davis's sister, Nancy Tizza. That's what I've heard from my cousin. He knows a lot more about this than I do. And they had 7 children: Nadine, Arthur, Jennings, Ethel, Glenn, Everett, and Pascal. I remember hearing stories about Pascal Conley from Bob Atwell. Somehow or another he's related here in the family. Let's see, and Luella Jane Conley, which was my great-grandmother, born December the 18th, 1876, and died April the 15th, 1944. She married Tom Davis, brother to Nancy. Okay, that's where I know that from then. It was already in here. See, they had 4 children: Edna, Burette, Mary. Edna, Burette, Mary. And I'm thinking the one other daughter was my grandmother. They didn't have her name. Her name was Ruth. And number 4 was Flora. She was born on August the 16th, 1878. And she married James Michael Walker. They had Robert Edgar, Grace, Mary, and Bleka. Mary Ellen was born on July the 19th, 1880, and married to Colin Shook, or let's see, they had Naomi, Juanita, Guy, and Lois. And Ora, which was child number 6, was born on April 17th, 1882, and died February the 11th, 1954. And she was a twin to Dora. Was married to Hiram Leroy Walker, and had James Leroy and Vernon Clay. Dora, the twin to Ora, was born on April the 17th, 1882, and married to Augusta Atwell, and had Arnold Silas, twin to Paul, and died at age 15. Paul Henry, Sarah, and Francis, and David William, and Robert Wainwright Conley II, Bob. And child number 8 was Sue, who was born on October the 23rd, 1884, married Matthew Johnson. And they had Irene, Eunice, Faye, Helen, and Brandon. And the 9th child, Catherine, was born May the 11th, 1888, and died December 1st, 1962. She married Harvey Denny and had Nora. Number 10, Nanny was born July 9th, 1890, and married Carl Van Pelt. And they had Bruce, Pauline, Fred, and Carl. Mary McCree Conley was raised a Lutheran, but since there wasn't a Lutheran church in Mooresville, she and several others helped to organize the St. Mark's Lutheran Church. She was a charter member of St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Mary and her daughters made up money for the church by selling quilt squares and quilting a large quilt. This quilt was given to the minister, and when he died, his family donated it back to the church, where it was placed in glass and can be seen by anyone who wishes. And this is our quilt.
So the quilt then was a fundraiser to
Right.
start the church.
To get it going and put a new one together. I forget, it seems like somebody said the Lutheran church was, was it originally over by the post office there?
That's where the, whatever it is now.
I can't remember what it is.
There's a law office there, but it's also Eastern Star or Masonic.
Yeah,
whatever.
that's what it is now.
Yeah. I have been to a service there.
That's an awful small building to be a church.
Yes, this is a nice facility, but this has been, and I'm not sure the date of this church here on this site, but it's relatively new. This is really a nice quilt.
This is what I was looking at. It looks like the dedication.
Right.
December the 13th, 1908. And the pastor must have been Dr. J.L. Morgan.
Right.
And then you've got the councilman listed, S.F. Ludwig,
Ludwig,
Carpenter, and Starr, and Goodman.
Yes.
And then you've got all these other people. Something that'd be about Sunday school. Worshipped in A.R. Church from December the 8th, 1907 to January the 22nd, 19... Mary must have kept up with a lot of dates. For all these dates to be on there like that, she kind of looks like stained glass. I'm just so amazed at how she went about putting stuff together, and it looks like real stained glass windows in the church.
That's right.
She was a very talented woman, that's for sure.
What a keepsake, not only for your family, but for the church.
Oh, yes. And for all the future little people that come to Mooresville and come to the church and can kind of know the history of where the quilt come from.
Well, we thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
And what a nice collection you do have. Thank you so much.
I'm going to keep building to it.
Good.